Okay, so we're going to take a couple minutes to go over what you read about just to be sure that you're clear on kind of the characteristics of birds and things about them. And then I did want to show you guys some groups of birds. We're not actually going to read the section of your book, but I thought it might be helpful to go over that. So let's talk about some general characteristics about birds. We all know birds have feathers, right? That's pretty much a given. A bird is a bird because it has feathers. Now, not all birds can fly, and we'll talk about that too, but they do have feathers. So they do this process called preening, which maybe you've even seen them do. Basically, it's grooming themselves. They maintain their feathers using oil from their oil glands, and it's important, especially for birds that might be in the water or that might fly a lot, to keep their feathers conditioned. So they also molt. We don't think about that a whole lot. We talked about molting when we talked about the crustacean or even some of the earlier simple invertebrates that we mentioned, but birds also molt. So they shed their feathers and they grow new ones, similar to the exoskeleton with the crustaceans that we were talking about. So there's two types of feathers, and this happened to be one of the questions that you addressed. And many of you guys are familiar with down feathers. You might have like a down comforter at home that might be a goose down or duck down feathers. They're kind of fluffy and insulated and they keep us warm, but they also keep the bird warm. They're on the inside and they trap air and keep them warmer. Closer to their body. And then we have what are called the contour feathers. These are kind of sleekly shaped and they help the bird in flight. So they can also be colorful to attract mates. You'll mostly see typically male birds being colorful. For example, the male cardinal is the red one. Female cardinals are more of a brownish, little bit of red in them and white, but those bright colors attract mates, and those are the contour feathers. These are on the outer part, and again, they kind of keep the bird aerodynamic, typically for flight. Speaking of flight, one of the things you had to address was some of those pictures in your book. So some of the answers that you might have had for that question had to do with a bunch of different ways that a bird is adapted for flight. So for example, they have what's called a high metabolism. Now we'll talk more about your metabolism or living things metabolism when we talk about your digestive system and how your body works. But basically it's how fast an animal or a living thing uses up its food supply. It burns calories for energy. Now, if you think about most birds, they're very active. They're always moving unless they're kind of a perching bird. But they are very, very suited for flight because they have a very high metabolism that it allows them to burn calories because they're using energy with that constant flight and movement. They're able to digest quickly. They have large eyes. Of course, that helps them be able to see far away. It might be because they're a bird of prey or because they need to see for flight. They have what are called air sacs that allow more oxygen, more surface area that can hold oxygen in their lungs. So that's important. They have those powerful flight muscles attached to the keel, and they also have a hollow skeleton. So yes, they have bones, but they're very, very rigid and light as opposed to ours, which are much more dense, right? And of course, the wing shape is important. We're going to address this a bit more when you guys are in 8th grade, but the shape of their wing was what the airplane wing is patented after. So it allows there to be lift, and you get a pressure difference, and that causes the lift based on the shape of their wing. And they have a rapid heartbeat. What does the heartbeat do? Well, when your heart beats, it gets oxygen to your organs, those muscles that need to be used, and all sorts of different parts that need to be used. Okay, so this was the pictures, or these were the pictures that you looked at when you were looking at those adaptations. So they're showing you the large eyes, the air sacs in their lungs, right? They store the air, and they obviously can get a continuous supply of air to their lungs, and that rapidly beating heartbeat you can see there. And then the other picture, just to kind of go over that a little bit, of course, is the wing shape and their skeletons being hollow. They show you a little bit about that. The powerful flight muscles near the front, there's a bone called the keel that they attach to. And then this statistic here, it says certain birds fly 970 kilometers or about 600 miles when they go south for the winter, right? And then they fly north back in the summer. And if it lives for 8 years, they had a math question there. But the basics of that point is, wow, that's a lot of flying. And that's every year. And some even travel farther than that. So here you can see like a closer up picture of those cross supports that you'll see with that rigid hollow skeleton that a bird has. It's very lightweight. So how do they fly, right? They flap their wings, we know that. But because of the shape of this wing, as I mentioned earlier, the airflow here comes across the top and then some comes across the bottom, and it creates a pressure difference. And so therefore there's what we call lift, right? And we'll talk, like I said, a little bit more about that next year. Now, there are two types of birds, just generally speaking, that I think it's important for us to kind of know about. We have what are called precocial birds. These are ones that kind of follow their mother around. They're active right after they're born. And as soon as they can stand up, they're kind of moving around and covered with feathers. They're not naked, and they kind of are a little bit more what we say active. So if you think of a chicken and a duck, that would be a good example. What's really interesting is we have this other group called altricial birds, right? So they are pretty much weak, helpless, naked. They don't have feathers. Some of our birds of prey, like hawks, are considered, or they are altricial, which is kind of funny because they seem like such tough birds, you could say, right? Their eyes are closed. They can't walk. They can't fly. Their parents keep them warm. And your general songbirds that we see here in Wisconsin are considered altricial also. So that's kind of interesting to be aware of. Okay, so that is some information about birds, right? Now let's just address the different groups. Now you did not read about these, but this is a section in your book, and I know you guys don't have your book, but it's a section in your book that we normally probably would have looked at a little bit more, but I just think it's nice to kind of go through them and mention them as we move forward. So we have birds that are flightless, right? So they don't have a large enough keel bone, and muscles. They usually can be really fast runners. Like, for example, if you've ever watched an ostrich run, they can run pretty fast. Or the kiwi bird. Even penguins are more suited for water. So typically, they just don't have a need to fly, or they might, their body shape is more conducive to swimming, or they're too big. Sometimes even you'll have roosters or chickens that are, they'll fly a little bit, but they're just too big, generally speaking, to be flying very often. Then we have the water birds, which you could also argue, they can sometimes fly and be in the water, but they're called water birds because they have these long beaks that are easier to catch fish in. They tend to hang out in the water, eat fish, eat plants, and of course you guys know geese, ducks, swans, pelicans, loons, cranes, right? They have webbed feet or longer legs typically for swimming. So you're familiar with a lot of those around here. Then we have perching birds, right? So they don't have as much of a web around their feet as they do their feet closing kind of automatically around a branch. So that would be like parrots, chickadees, the scarlet tanager. They're adapted, right, for resting on trees. So those are our perching birds. And I'm just naming a few of them here to give you an idea. Then we have birds of prey, right? They hunt, they eat other vertebrates, insects, mammals, fish, reptiles, amphibians. They have sharp claws, curved, sharp beaks. And of course, you guys are familiar with eagles, hawks, owls, ospreys. And you're pretty familiar with those. Now, some other publications, some other books, some other videos, some other scientists would say there's other groups, but these are just our general groups to kind of familiarize us with birds that we might see. So now we'll come back together.